I'm gonna turn on the recording. So welcome everyone. We have one more webinar like next week, and this is our final webinar. So I would like to welcome you. Today we have a very interesting topic about the online writing environment. This is something I want to try as well. So please let's welcome Laurence Kinsella from Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan, and Craig Coulson, our secretary and valued member of our team. Thank you very much for joining us. You can find the recording in our YouTube channel, and also you will be able to download the certificate of attendance at the end of our session, okay? Thank you so much for coming. Craig and Laurence, welcome and enjoy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll begin. So welcome everybody, and thank you for your interest. I'm Laurence, and I'll be presenting the first sections today. Later, Craig will take over to look at O, online and writing environment, we call it O, in regard to some common faculty concerns. After that, he'll take you through a visual tour of the O infrastructure. So I'll refer to it as O all the way through the presentation. Right, so outline. So this is the outline of today's webinar. I'll begin with an overview of the Nazarbayev University context, because no two contexts are the same, and it's important we understand perhaps what is possible in one context might not be possible in another. Next, we'll look at some of O's key features. These are the things we wanted to address when we began this a few years ago. This is followed by identifying some of the issues and challenges we faced as we implemented the system. We then have some quick summaries of feedback from students and from tutors, which is from the end of the last academic year. I will then move on to talk about the next stage of O's evolution. We've been doing this for 4 years. The 5th year will see further change. Craig will then take over with an overview of how O would address some common issues faced by teachers, first of all. He'll then take you through a visual illustration of O's infrastructure. And finally, we will be pleased to take your questions, or not. We'll see. Okay, so next slide. So the context, Nazarbayev University is in its 10th year, so a pretty new university. Originally, Craig and myself and the people who were here early on worked for University College London, and we were on secondment, and there was only the foundation, obviously, to begin with. Okay, this is a university foundation year, so not a pre-sessional. There are 2 15-week semesters, and the entry to Nazarbayev University is competitive. So that means that it's a national competition, basically. First of all, there's a screening through APTIS and the British Council to see if people should take, if they're at the right level to take our exams. Then after that, we have Cambridge entrance exams, which take place throughout Kazakhstan. They're invigilated by us and also by Cambridge, who provide observers, and the papers are graded by Cambridge. The other factor is IELTS. So that each candidate takes 2 Cambridge entrance exams, which are now critical thinking and maths, and the English part is IELTS. There are 650 state scholarships. So the top 650 students in the country who enter this competition are awarded the places first. The scholarships cover living costs and accommodations provided for most students. Minimum IELTS level, as you can see, is 6 overall, and the average this year was 6.6. And we have, as I said, 650 students. We were formerly a pathway program, but we're not anymore, because now students choose their major at the end of year one, and year one is a common core year. The students must pass, though, the foundation year to enter the undergraduate degree. Okay, next slide. Okay, so some key features. A problem is that we all know this, is that you can have students, especially 17 or 18-year-olds, who become disengaged. In our experience here, it's partly because they're coming to the big city, if you like, and they're not being supervised by parents. Having to do their writing on this online environment helps us quickly identify students who are disengaged. And when we began this, thinking about O, which was in 2016-17, we were thinking about what we wanted, what our aims were. Our course is constructively aligned. So the assessments, the learning outcomes, the lesson materials are all aligned together, and we create everything. So once we'd achieved that, we began to think about other issues, which included student engagement, academic integrity, feedback, and the relationship between personal tutors and students. And we then thought about how technology could help achieve or cover these issues. And this is how O was born. So we knew the desired outcomes, and then we thought, and Craig thought a lot about this, how can we use technology to address these? So, as I said, we can swiftly see if students aren't working, because all the writing takes place in the online environment. It's also a safe place to store work. It ensures that it can't be accidentally deleted, which is very important, so the dog doesn't eat the work anymore. Okay. O also frames writing as a process. So the students and the tutors can see where revisions have been made and how issues raised in feedback have been resolved. All sources used for the research projects must be stored in O for tutor and student reference, which means that the tutors can see where the students have, what they've taken from their sources. And the tutors can also advise on if any paraphrasing by the students is accurate in terms of retaining the author's main idea, but it's also that it's in the student's own words. There's another feature which Craig will show you later called Draftback, which allows tutors to see students working in real time. So all of these elements guard against plagiarism. Tutors and their students are continually in contact. And remember, we were doing this before coronavirus. So even though they're at the university, they're continually in online contact. Or no, feedback can be given at any stage. And equally, if tutors are not giving feedback, it becomes quickly apparent. So we wanted, as far as possible, for all students to receive a similar standard and a similar quantity of feedback. This allows us to monitor that. O also provides a record of academic issues that need to be discussed during weekly tutorials, Each student here has an individual weekly tutorial. In the next academic year, those tutorials, excuse me a second. Those tutorials are going to be extended to deal with the coronavirus situation, as we'll be totally online. The tutorials are also recorded so that the tutors and students can revisit their discussions. And as we've got some 17-year-old students, it's very important they're recorded for other reasons as well. Okay, O helps us address learning outcomes. For example, some of our learning outcomes include understanding and responding to feedback, and also understanding the concept of academic integrity. Okay, next slide. So these are the issues we faced at the beginning. I think we both remember these well, especially in the first year of development. So some of our teaching fellows totally mistrusted it. So initially, quite a large minority of teaching fellows were resistant to O. These were probably mainly faculty who'd been there a long time, doing things in a different way, and did not provide consistent feedback or useful feedback. Some of it was like good or missing or whatever, which is not particularly useful. Or some simply felt challenged by using technology. We've addressed that by a lot of professional development, which has been undertaken on O. And survey feedback now, as you'll see later, shows that now a large majority of faculty value O. The student resistance was, what a lot of students do. They procrastinate and they didn't like people seeing them doing that. But we'd found already that students who didn't work consistently were a lot more likely to look for shortcuts when under time pressure. And that helps us to address this early. And student feedback actually is now consistently positive, as you'll see, at a very high level. Students must have computer access. Obviously, that wasn't an issue when we're all on campus until March, but it may be when we're working from distance. We're taking steps to address issues, especially with socially disadvantaged students. And we're hoping that we can make sure everyone has a laptop and internet access for the next academic semester. The challenge of technology and change, it's a key issue. We found that using even relatively simple technology was a major challenge for some tutors and perhaps more surprisingly for some students. We always talk about digital natives, but in our experience, it doesn't help that much. And they have to be taught how to use technology as well. So we address this by production of step-by-step instructions, screencasts on O, and face-to-face development sessions. And the key really was piloting and training. Okay, next slide. So this is just for your information. So feedback last year, 501 students completed a long survey, but this is parts of it about O. The O helps to organise my work, 87% agreed. Continual tutor online feedback was useful, 94.5 agreed. And O forced me to think more about avoiding plagiarism, 70% agreed. So, as we can see from students, very positive. Next slide. Faculty, not quite as positive. 49 faculty completed the survey, but we have to take into account that originally the faculty weren't anywhere near as much in favour as O as they were at the end of last year. So we can see that the first one, 74% agreed, only 14% disagreed. Continual feedback encouraged students, 12% disagreed. And it's a user-friendly platform, 16% disagreed. So we're getting there as well. Okay, next slide. This is about what we want to do next with O. So a major focus of faculty continual professional development will be on how to use assessment rubrics, informative feedback. We've done some of this already, but we want to do much, much more. So we'd like to move our students' focus away from what they obsess over, which is grades. But the trouble is the grades themselves don't provide any feedback on how performance can be improved. We want our tutors to focus on rubric-informed feedback, which makes clear what has been done well and also gives specific information where students need to improve and not just where, how they can improve. This should lead to training our students in the use of rubrics for assessing their own performance and taking some personal responsibility for responding to feedback, which is actually an existing course learning outcome. Our research project rubric and the Viva examinations are all assessed through rubrics, which are designed to assess if and to what degree the course learning outcomes have been achieved. As I said earlier, our course is constructively aligned. Our lesson materials have aims which feed into the learning outcomes. And in turn, we only assess what we've taught through our materials and has been covered in class. We'd assumed that this approach would ensure tutor feedback was well targeted. To some extent it has. However, we want to take this further and make feedback an explicit element of constructive alignment. And we use the rubrics in the O environment to target the feedback. So specific and detailed formative feedback using the rubrics will show students what they've done well, what they haven't, and how they can be better. So I suppose the end aim is for students and teachers to become partners in a learning and assessment process in both parts. And finally, from me, we'll also be adding Viva preparation to the O environment next year, especially on the short introductory presentation the students do before they start defending their Viva. Okay, I think that's it from me, and I'll pass it over to Craig.
Okay, thank you, Laurence. All right, so I'll just give you a little insight into how it actually looks. So what I'll do is I'll just sort of add to what Laurence has said to define what it is, also to look at a few common issues that I think teachers often come up against when marking written assignments. And then I'm going to play a screencast video to you, which goes through the actual files, the folders. You get to see exactly how it looks. Now, because I no longer work for Nazarbayev University, I obviously don't have access to the systems anymore, but one of Laurence's colleagues, Raquel Reinagel, very kindly put together a screencast, so I'm going to try and play the screencast and narrate over that. So essentially, the online writing environment is exactly that. It's an environment or an ecosystem. It's a place where files and folders are organized in a way which is conducive to the research process. It's also conducive in the sense that there are channels of communication between tutors and students. And it is generally supportive of that process by virtue of the fact that it's a way for students, tutors, and administrators to kind of see what's going on. Now, there are four points that I just wanted to make, and I think you could probably relate to them in some way. Quite often when you're looking at students' assignments, you'll have a general idea of how they got there, but sometimes they might surprise you, you know, delivering very little over the period of the term and then suddenly pulling out something quite amazing. So sometimes we don't always get a true sense of how they got to that point that they did in their writing. Also, students are obviously encouraged to use a number of academic sources in their writing. And quite often, if you've got a large workload, you've got 10 plus assignments to mark in a short period of time, to be able to go through all of those sources and check the actual information and ideas that they've taken from those sources and put into their writing can be quite arduous. And sometimes it's really not that practical. The other thing is that I think a lot of people feel that Turnitin is often seen as the first and last line of defense. Of course, you can use things like Google as well to check students' writing, but I, as I hopefully will show you shortly, would argue that the O or the OWE provides more insights into the way that our students work, which helps you to understand, you know, are they acting with integrity? And if they're not, then you can remedy that and intervene as necessary. And then the fourth point really is at the end of the term, when you're writing up your reports about the students and you're sort of foraging through your different folders and files, trying to recount and remember exactly what their strengths and weaknesses were and how they've improved. I would argue that the OWE is a rich source of that data and information that you can refer to. And because it's kind of built up over a period of time, it's all based on evidence. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share the screencast video with you. So just give me a moment while I do that. Just going to click a few buttons. Okay, so share screen. Okay, just a moment. Okay, so on your screen, you should see a Google Drive directory. So just a couple of things before I begin. So first of all, just imagine that there are 3 levels. So at the bottom, you've got students, then you've got tutors, and then you've got administrators above that. So the way that this is set up is there is a folder which is stored in a unique account by administrators. And within that folder is everything. So all of the folders, all of the files that the tutors and the students engage in are all created and located in a centralized place in an individual account set up by the administrators. Now, the beauty of that is that it's fairly secure in the sense that only administrators can access that account. So maybe 1 or 2 people would know what the login details are. If things were accidentally deleted, they can easily be recovered. And the other benefit of this is that if teachers were suddenly to be absent or left the role for whatever reason, being an administrator, you can then reassign folders and files to other colleagues. The other point to mention here is that there are 2 permissions that you need to bear in mind with something like Google Drive, and that is owner and editor. So as the administrator of the account, you are the owner, which means that you have all of the editing privileges. As an editor, you're able to edit files and view files and comment on files and download them as well, but you can't share them. And that is very deliberate, because one of the things that we tried to do, one of the reasons for setting up the OWE in the first place, was to try and hinder academic dishonesty, i.e. one of those would be collusion, students sharing their files with other people and so on. So those are the two things that I just wanted to make clear first. So I'm going to play the video and I'll try and narrate over it. Now, as you're watching, if you have any questions that arise, just make a note of which part of the video we're looking at, i.e. here we're just going into the initial folder, which is the research project folder. Just make a note of what we're looking at, foci, and your question, and then we'll be able to look at it at the end. So right now, we're in the 2019-2020 assignment folder. So within this folder, we've got all of the teacher folders, group 1 all the way down to 40-something, and each one is clearly labeled with the group, teacher name, and it says research project class folder. One thing that is important is that labeling is taken seriously, that they are as clear and uniform as possible. Otherwise, it can get a little bit confusing. So right now, we're going to go into a teacher's class folder. So this is Raquel Reynagles. I hope I pronounced her family name right. And within that, you can see approximately 15 or 16 student folders. So the idea here is that the teacher's folder contains all of the student folders, and the teacher can see everything that's going on within those folders. Now the students, for example, Batabek here, he cannot see what Arajan's doing. He can only see what's in his folder with his tutor. At administration level, all of the folders and files could be accessed. And similarly, I suppose, in a way, the tutors can only access their own class folder. They don't have access rights to other tutor folders. So going into the student research project folder, there are two folders that are key really to this, and that is the research project folder and the sources, reference list and annotated sources folder. And we've also got a README file here. The README file just gives a bit of clarity on the structure of the folder and what the folders and files do. These additional folders here are separate. These are additional, but these two are the focus, the research project and the sources folder. So we're going to go into the research project folder now. So in this folder, you can see 3 documents. There is a working document, and it's this document that is perhaps the most important one, because this is the document that the students draft their work in. So from the very beginning of the process to the very end of the process, regardless of whether there's a submission 1, submission 2, or a first draft or a second draft, all of that takes place within a single document. And the idea behind that is that because all of the edits and changes are made within that document, it's possible to see the evolution of that student's writing. It's possible to give feedback, comments, and check their engagement, which I'll show you in a moment. So let's go into the working document. We'll have a quick look. Okay, so as you can see here, we're looking at the working documents, and on the side there you can see that Raquel has left some comments. The good thing with the comment feature in Google Drive is that, or Google Docs even, is that you can reply, you can start a conversation with your teacher. For example. And so feedback can be given at any time, I suppose. It can be delivered during tutorials. So as Laurence said, there are tutorials each week. You can have the student sat there with a laptop, and you've got your laptop open, and you can go through it live and leave comments on, or you can leave comments on the document outside of tutorials. So how you actually manage that process, the approach that you take is entirely up to you and your institution. So I think we're going to go into the history of the document now. And I think this is quite a useful thing. So Laurence mentioned earlier that students, a lot of the students that at the university tend to procrastinate at times, possibly down to age or whatever, by being able to go into the documents and looking at the version history, it's possible to see how often they're going in addition to what kind of changes they're making. So if you're concerned that a student isn't really engaging with the document, then the evidence is before you. You can actually see it. And when I mentioned earlier that you can see how the writing is evolving, you can click between the different versions throughout that timeline to see how it's changed, what's been deleted, what's been added, and so on. So we'll come back out of the version history. And Laurence mentioned earlier something called Draftback, and Draftback is an add-on to Google Docs and Google Drive. So the great thing about Google Docs is you can see the version history, but Draftback takes it one step further in that you can actually see all of the keystrokes that they've made. So I'll just continue playing the video and you can see. This is not in real time, I don't think, but you can actually play it in real time if you wanted to. So this gives us also a bit of an insight into the way that students are writing. I mean, if a student is genuinely sitting there typing away as we would, you'd expect them to be going forwards and backwards, making typos, adding, deleting, and jumping between different parts of the document. It wouldn't happen in a completely linear way. Now, we at least I say we, I don't work for the university anymore, but when I did work there, we made the point that information, that anything that's written in here should be typed. It shouldn't be copied and pasted unless, of course, it's like a direct quotation. So if you were to play this at real time and you could suddenly see big chunks just suddenly appearing on the screen, then that suggests that they're copying from somewhere else. Now, if they're copying that information from their notes file, which is within the OWE, then fair play. But if they're just copying it from outside of the OWE from an unspecified source, then that might be something to investigate further. Okay, so I'll just continue with that. I don't think this is used in all cases. It's only where really a teacher suspects that some kind of dishonesty has occurred and they can delve in a little bit more deeply. Now, there is another key feature to Draftback, which I think is very insightful, which you'll see in a moment. And it basically provides you with more of an analysis of the interactions that the student has had with the document. So if we just wait a moment. It should be coming up to it shortly. Okay, if I can skip a little bit here. Here we go. Okay, so I've just moved in a little bit. So yeah, you've got this timeline of activity here. So this is when the student first started working in the document, and it shows specifically during the days when they were working on it. So in this case, the student was working on it quite a lot on that Saturday, and then just sporadically after that, and then a little bit more probably towards submission time. Underneath, it also documents where in the actual file the changes were made. So like I mentioned earlier, it's a process. It's not necessarily a linear thing. You'll be jumping around between different parts of the project. And then underneath, a little bit further down here, it says writing sessions. So this gives you almost like an itemization of the interactions that the student has had with the document. So I'd be a little bit worried if they'd only engaged in the document, say, once or twice, and basically just sat down and wrote the entire thing in a single sitting in an hour. That might raise a few alarm bells. So in this case, they've been interacting with the document fairly frequently, multiple sittings, which is what you would expect from anyone writing an assignment of this kind. Okay. So in a way, it's kind of like a supercharged sort of version history. It just gives you a little bit more depth and detail about how students are interacting with their documents. Okay, so we're going to come out of that now and look at the notes file. Now, we didn't have the notes file originally when we started this process, but it occurred to my colleagues that, you know, we want to know where ideas are coming from. So the idea behind this is that within the notes document, students can kind of use it as a scratch pad, come up with their ideas. Tutors can see how those ideas are coming on, discuss them with the students, as Raquel has done there. And so again, it's another part of the jigsaw puzzle in sort of understanding what's going on in the student's mind and how ideas are starting to form and whether they're starting to see the issues. And I kind of think that that's a bit more of how we do write projects. We do kind of have a scratch pad where we play around with ideas, and then we take those ideas and we put it into the actual draft. This file here is the research project proposal. So yeah, typically before putting together a research project assignment or a draft, there'll be some kind of plan. I think that's fairly standard practice. And again, tutors can interact with their students using the feedback feature. Yeah, and in this case, students were also encouraged to make annotated sources where to demonstrate that they had actually read sources that they're claiming to have read and used in their projects. They actually have to provide a summary and evaluation of those sources. The second folder that I'm going to show you very briefly, and then we'll bring things to an end, is this folder here. It's the sources, reference list and annotated sources folder. And this kind of addresses the point I mentioned earlier about not having time to go through all of their sources, or trying to find the sources online. If students are told all the way through the process that they need to put their sources into a folder, which is shared with you, you can check those sources along the way. And then similarly, when you do have to mark their drafts, you've got quick access to them. One thing that is worth pointing out when students put their sources in there is that they label them, because they often come out with obscure numbers in the PDF document downloads. So make sure that they have a sort of labeling system for quick retrieval. And you could also encourage students as well to use markup apps such as Acrobat or Kami to mark up instances of text within a source, which you can then check against their working document to see how well or not they've managed to integrate that idea. So, you know, one of the points that that the OWE really tries to address is to help students avoid plagiarism, to develop good paraphrasing skills. And so by marking up the bit of text in the source and then comparing it with what they've written, teachers are able to see more quickly how that's happening and respond to it. So this is I think this is the reference list. So I believe that students were encouraged to keep a running log of sources as they were going along, rather than just doing it at the last minute. So that is basically it. That is the online writing environment, a place, an environment in which the folders and files are all stored, shared between those that need to have access to them. As you can see, it hinders to some degree academic dishonesty. It encourages students to manage their time. We can see how they're engaging. And I think in a time where we're obviously all working remotely with new students across the globe, it kind of helps us feel a bit closer to the students, I think. So I think at the moment it's a very valuable tool. And I'd be very, very pleased if anyone were to follow what we've done here. So that concludes my part of the presentation. Laurence, did you want to say anything else at all?
No, not really. I think we should ask for questions. One thing did occur with the sources. As we go fully online now, obviously students won't be on campus and they won't be going in the library. So every source will have to have a DOI or a URL. And that will be part of the assessment as well, in terms of grading. If they're not there, students will lose marks.
Yeah, I guess just one final thing I was going to add, Laurence, before we go into questions and answers, is that also by storing those folders and files where they are, it serves as an archive. So over the years, all of the work that people have done is stored. There's this kind of running account, as it were. And that's also useful if we want to make, or if the university wants to make training material. Few benefits to this. Okay, so we'll open up the floor to any questions that people might have.
Hello guys, do you have any questions?
Hey, I have a question if anyone else is, no, can't see anyone else. Okay, thanks guys, that was really interesting. I just wondered, you mentioned earlier about Turnitin, and you obviously incorporate that somehow into your into the process. How does what you just showed us integrate into it? Do you have a VLE? Do you use anything like a Blackboard, and is it all kind of enmeshed somehow?
Okay, I can take this one. So I keep saying we, but I don't work there anymore. I've got to get out of that habit. I do apologise. So at Nazarbayev University, they use Moodle. So Moodle is kind of the VLE with the various course material. It's also the place where Turnitin submissions are made.
Okay, so what you've shown us, all those documents, they'll have like a Turnitin report produced as a sort of counterpart to go in the folder as well.
Yes, yes, they will. Can I just add something here? And that was, we specifically wanted to do that because we found that far too many people rely on Turnitin and use it for what it wasn't designed for. I mean, Turnitin itself doesn't, it gives you ideas where things might be plagiarized, but it's not it shouldn't be used for, there's this much similarity, that's how much they plagiarize, which we found some people were doing. That's not true at all. So it's just we use Turnitin as a sort of a highlighter of where there might be plagiarism, but O shows us far more.
Cool, thanks very much.
Yes?
May I ask a question? Fantastic, a wonderful system, and I particularly like the Draftback facility, and I would, if that's on Google Docs, I certainly want to use it. You're talking about 17-year-old students producing individual research projects, including quite high-fluting academic research papers. That can't be the first stage of your O project. How do you use O to lead up to these individual work on quite high-fluting research? Is there any communal introduction to writing?
Yes, I'll answer it, Craig, if you like. There's a preparatory project in the first semester, which is a shorter one, and introduces parts of what will be in the research project. But for example, we're not looking for synthesis in the prep project at any high level. That comes later. So we begin in August, and they're writing the research project you saw, actually writing it from January, and there's a first draft of that as well, and they submit in April. The prep project starts in the second week of the autumn semester, and that lasts until about week 9, if I remember, I should do, of the first semester. And then there's the main research project proposal, which Craig did show you, where they look at they put their research questions together, they find some sources, annotate those sources, and provide an outline of what they're going to do in semester 2. So yeah, there's a long build up.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
We have another question about attendance policy.
Yes, hi, this is, my name is Jenny Brown. I'm at London University, Queen Mary College. This has all really been very helpful. We're just preparing to go probably online in September. And it came up in our team meeting this morning, actually, about how to engage students. We have a lot of students, or we're getting certain students who just log on at the beginning of a class and then sort of disappear off. Shall I put my video on? Kind of disappear off. For engagement sort of tips and advice that you've shown us today, but does anyone have any sort of ideas about attendance policy, you know, getting them into the classroom at all, and also keeping them there and keeping them motivated in perhaps more sort of plenary or small group sessions?
Laurence, do you want me to take this, or do you want to take it?
No, you can take it, I can add. It's fine.
Okay. So, I mean, with the OWE, the good thing is that you can see when students are going into the documents, you can see when they're engaging with it. And if my memory serves me correctly, when I was working at the university, I think sort of formative goals were set each week that the students were supposed to be demonstrating that they were engaging and or had to reach certain targets with their writing. So in terms of attendance in that sense, we could see whether they were or weren't engaging. And I remember when I was there, I did occasionally make a little summary of who's been engaging a lot, who hasn't been engaging a lot, and I would just contact those individuals and have a quiet word with them. Obviously, if it gets more serious, then it goes to potentially concern level. But the other point that I just wanted to make I do apologize, I've forgotten the lady who just spoke, is that this system, Jenny, yes, so the technology used here is Google, which I am aware in some countries is not allowed. So I just wanted to add in that I believe such a system could be replicated using Microsoft's OneDrive and SharePoint if you wanted to do something like that.
Yeah,
Okay,
we are looking at those. Sorry, please.
Yeah, just to add to that, we're looking at, it's interesting what you said, because next year we normally on face-to-face classes obviously have attendance because we want them to come to the classes. As we all know, going to the class doesn't mean you're engaged. And we're looking at changing next year. Yeah, well, we're looking at changing next year to the grade. We have a grade for attendance, 5% each semester. But next year, that's going to be 5% for engagement, not for attendance, because they're not going to be there. We're going to have a sort of a flipped program. So they'll be doing in EAP something like, it's not quite finished yet, we're just finalizing it, but they'll be doing something like 7 hours on Moodle, asynchronous, and about 4.5 in Zoom classrooms. But we're thinking we'll give the engagement mark for what they do in O, because as you can see in O, it's where they produce most of the work, and we can see if they've done it and they've been engaged. And we'll also have, next year, we had that more or less last year as well, but in a stronger way, we'll have way stages where X has to be produced by this stage, and if you don't produce it, you don't get any grade for that part of the weighting. So if we want them to produce 6 annotated sources in semester 1, we'll give them a time to do that. They have to produce 2 by X date, 2 by Y, 2 by Z. And if they don't, they'll lose grade as they go along. And our students are extremely motivated in Kazakhstan by grades. So we don't have to grade it then, but they have to produce it by then. So it's all going to be about engagement, not about actually physically or virtually just being there.
Yeah, we've thought about, we're starting to think about that, you know, sort of some sort of encouragement, you know, like some sort of participation grade, whether we make it part